I inherited a boarded-up diner from my late wife while my daughter received a $2 million lake house. My daughter called me a burden nobody asked for and threw me out. So I drove 2 hours to that rundown diner. But when I turned the key, I froze at what I found inside. The reading of the will took place 9 days after I buried my wife of 41 years. 9 days of casseroles I couldn't taste of. My daughter telling everyone within earshot that she was handling everything. What handling everything meant I would learn was that she had already called a locksmith for the lake house before her mother's headstone had even been ordered. The law office had carpet thick enough to swallow your footsteps and a conference table so long it felt like a courtroom. My daughter sat on one side with her husband, both leaning forward like contestants waiting for a prize will to stop. I sat alone on the other side, still in the same gray suit I had worn to the funeral, because it was the only one I owned that still fit. The attorney opened a leather folder, put on her reading glasses, and began without ceremony. She read my daughter's portion first, the lake house and the boathouse appraised at a little over $2 million. The investment accounts another $1 million for the life insurance, $300,000. I did the arithmetic without meaning to, a reflex from 36 years of teaching high school math. Nearly $3.8 million. My daughter let out a small gasp and grabbed her husband's wrist. He didn't smile, but his eyes did. The thing eyes do when a man is already spending money in his head. Then the attorney turned the page and looked at me. To my husband, she read, I leave the commercial property located on the rural route west of the city. The structure, formerly a diner, and the 11 acres on which it sits. County tax. Valuation, $96,000. The room went very quiet. My daughter blinked twice, then laughed. It was not a kind laugh. Wait, she said. That's it. A broken down hash house in the middle of nowhere. She turned to her husband. She left him a parking lot and a building with no roof. He murmured something soft that was supposed to sound like a protest, but was really just agreement wearing a coat. I should have said something. I should have defended my wife, because my wife never did a single thing by accident in her entire life. But my throat had closed up and the words would not come, because I was asking myself the same question my daughter was asking out loud. Why the diner? In 41 years of marriage, she had never once mentioned it. I hadn't even known we owned land out there. The attorney slid a small brass key across the table, the old, heavy kind they stopped cutting decades ago, and a cream-colored envelope with my name written on the front in my wife's slanted, stubborn handwriting. There is a sealed letter, the attorney said, your wife was very specific. You are to open it at the property, not before, not in your car, at the property. My daughter stood up so fast her chair scraped. This is unbelievable, she said. I'm calling my own lawyer. The attorney replied, perfectly composed, that this was her right, that the estate plan would hold, and that contesting it would cost a great deal of money and change. Nothing. My daughter grabbed her coat at the door. She turned and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on my own child's face before, something flat and final, like she was looking at furniture that needed to be hauled away. Enjoy your diner, Dad, she said, but don't come crawling to me when you figure out Mom left you a tax bill and a tetanus shot. The door clicked shut behind them. For a long moment, the attorney and I just sat there in the quiet. Then she took off her glasses, and when she looked at me, there was something underneath the professionalism, something almost like an apology. Your wife loved you very much, she said. I worked with her on this for over a year. She thought about every comm, then she tapped the brass key once with her finger. She told me you would have questions. She said to tell you one thing, trust the diner. Everything you need is there. I drove back to the lake house that evening, except it wasn't my house anymore. That took some getting used to. The same kitchen where my wife and I had eaten breakfast across from each other for 2 decades. The same staircase where she used to call down that the coffee was getting cold. The same bedroom we're on. Her last morning, she had held my hand with what little grip she had left and whispered 4 words I didn't understand. Trust the diner, sweetheart. I had thought it was the medication. Talking. The hospice nurse had warned me that toward the end people say things that don't connect to anything. So I had kissed her forehead and told her I would. The way you agree with someone you love when agreeing is the only gift you have left. She died that afternoon. Now I sat in the driveway holding a brass key in a sealed envelope, understanding that those 4 words had been the most lucid thing anyone said to me all year. My daughter and her husband had already moved in. I want to be precise about that because when I tell people this part, they assume I'm exaggerating. The funeral was on a Tuesday. They moved in the following Saturday. When I came in that evening, their 2 cars were in the garage and mine had been moved to the driveway. And that small thing told me everything about how the next month was going to go. My daughter didn't knock on the guest room door. That was another thing. I had moved into the guest room during the illness so the hospital bed could go in our bedroom. And after the funeral, nobody suggested I move back. One day, the master bedroom door was open and her husband's shirts were hanging in my closet. She came in 2 days after the reading, holding a single sheet of paper. She didn't sit down. This is a 30-day notice to vacate, she said flat. As a parking ticket. It's legal and it's official. We need the space. We're starting a family. She set it on the dresser next to my watch and my wedding ring. And Dad, she added on her way out, don't take anything that isn't strictly yours when you go. I made an inventory. The silver, the art, Mom's jewelry, it stays. It was in the house. It conveys what the house it conveys. My daughter, who I taught to ride a bicycle in the church parking lot, who cried so hard the first day of kindergarten that I sat in the school hallway until lunch so she could see me through the little window in the classroom door, stood in the doorway of the room where I slept and used the word conveys about her dead mother's wedding china. I sat on the edge of the guest bed for a long time after she left, holding the eviction notice in one hand and the brass key in the other. Down the hall, I could hear her laughing on the phone with someone, talking paint colors, planning a nursery, in the room where her mother had died 11 days earlier. 30 days, 41 years of marriage, 36 years of teaching, 2 decades of mortgage payments on this exact house, and it all came down to 30 days in a guest room and a key to a building I had never seen. I looked at the sealed envelope on the nightstand, my name in her handwriting, the letters slanting hard to the right, the way they always did when she was certain about something. What did you leave me? I whispered to the empty room. The room didn't answer, but for the first time since the funeral, I felt something underneath the grief that wasn't grief. It was curiosity. My wife had spent the last year of her life building something in secret, and whatever it was she had built it for me. The next 2 weeks were a slow demolition of my life, carried out politely in daylight by people who told themselves they were being reasonable. It started with the books. I came downstairs one morning to find 2 men in the den pulling my wife's books off the shelves and dropping them into black contractor bags. 40 years of paperbacks with her notes in the margins. The mystery novels I had read aloud to her in the hospice bed because she said my voice made the medication easier. Into the bags, my daughter stood on the porch in a blazer, coffee in hand, directing the work like a foreman. Those are your mother's books, I said. They're dusty, she said without turning around. We're putting in a wet bar. A worker came past carrying a framed photograph from the mantel. My wife and Me at a roadside diner counter on our honeymoon, both of us 26 and sunburned, and laughing at something the waitress had said. I asked if I could have it. The worker stopped and looked at my daughter. My daughter looked at the frame, and I watched her do the math on it. That frame is sterling, she said. It goes with the estate. She nodded toward the street, dumpsters out front. If you want the picture, I want you to understand that I am not a dramatic man. I taught quadratic equations to 15-year-olds for 36 years, but I watched that photograph disappear around the corner in a stranger's hands, and something in my chest cracked clean down the middle quietly, the way a beam cracks in a house long before the ceiling comes down. That night after their lights went out, I put on my coat and went out to the dumpster with a flashlight. It took me 40 minutes. The frame was gone. She had been telling the truth about the sterling, but the photograph itself had been popped out and tossed loose, and I found it between a bag of drywall scraps and a broken lamp bent at one corner. I slid it inside my jacket against my chest and stood there in the cold driveway for a minute breathing. A 70-year-old man digging through the trash for his own honeymoon 20 feet from a window with his dead wife's curtains still hanging in it. I remember thinking I was glad she couldn't see this. I was wrong about that. She had seen all of it coming in detail long before I had, but I didn't know that yet. The small humiliations piled up like snow. My retirement coffee mug disappeared from the cabinet and turned up in a donation box in the garage. Her husband started parking his car in a way that blocked mine in, so I had to knock and ask him to move it whenever I needed groceries, and he would sigh every single time. This long-suffering sigh, like I was a tenant who kept asking for the heat to be fixed. At dinner, when I came down they talked over me and around me and about me. He's been wandering around the yard again, she would say to her husband while I sat at the same table, eating the same chicken. He left the side door unlocked twice this week. I'm telling you, it's starting. It's starting. Those two words did more work than anything else she said that month. They were quiet little seeds planted in front of witnesses, and it took me too long to understand what crop she was planning to harvest from them. 3 days before my move-out date, I found the folder. I was hauling a box out to the car when I noticed the recycling bin at the curb overflowing. Her husband had been purging paperwork all week. Sticking out of the top was a manila folder with a handwritten tab, and the tab was in my daughter's looping cursive, and the tab read, Dad, placement options. I stood at the curb with the box on my hip and read those 3 words 4 or 5 times. The way you reread a sentence in a language you thought you spoke. Inside were glossy brochures for a senior residence 2 hours away in the opposite direction from anyone I knew. The cover photo showed a dining hall with fluorescent lights and a row of people in wheelchairs parked, facing a television that wasn't on. I looked the place up later. 2.1 stars. One review described a man left in a soiled bed for most of a morning. Another said a wedding ring vanished from a resident's room, and the staff just shrugged. Under the brochures was a contract, a residency agreement. My full name was already typed into the resident line. Shared occupancy, the cheapest wing, $2,900 a month. And then I saw the date next to the deposit signature, and my stomach went somewhere below the curb. The date was from 3 weeks before my wife died. I need you to sit with that the way I had to while my wife was upstairs in a hospice bed, fighting for every single breath while I was reading her mystery novels out loud and adjusting her pillows and learning the difference between her pain face and her sleeping face. My daughter was downstairs at the kitchen table, our kitchen table, filling out paperwork to warehouse me. She hadn't even waited for her mother to finish dying. The plan wasn't a reaction to the will. The plan came first. The will reading, the laughing, the 30-day notice, all of it was just the schedule catching up to a decision she had already made while her mother's heart was still beating one floor above her head. I didn't confront her. I want to be honest about why I didn't trust my own voice. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, 41 years of being a calm man would come out of me all at once, and whatever I said could be used as evidence of exactly the story she was already telling about me. He's confused. He's paranoid. He's wandering. It's starting. So I did what my wife, it turned out, had been doing for 2 years. I documented. I carried the folder into the garage, spread every page on the workbench, and photographed all of it with my phone, the contract, the typed name, the deposit date, the brochures, the reviews. I backed the photos up twice. Then I slid the folder under the spare tire in my trunk, walked back inside, and ate dinner across the table for my daughter. And when she asked why I was so quiet, I said I was just tired. And she gave her husband a look that said, "See, it's starting." And I let her have it. I let her believe the story, because 3 days later I would be 2 hours away, and I was beginning to suspect, with nothing to go on yet but a brass key and 4 whispered words, that my wife had known something about this family that I was only now catching up to. You might be wondering why I didn't just leave right then. Why a grown man with a car and a key to his own building stayed 3 more nights under a roof with people who were pricing out his storage. The attorney had called me the day after the will, reading, and told me something I held on to like a railing. "Do not leave early," she said, "not 1 day before the date on that notice. If you walk out before the deadline, their lawyers can argue you abandoned the marital residence voluntarily, and it complicates things. You do not want complicated. Let the clock run out clean. Do not give them an opening." Then she had paused and added, almost gently, "Your wife thought of this too." My wife had gamed out the entire month I was living through. She had known our daughter would take the house. She had known I would be evicted. She had known I would want to bolt, and she had hired a woman whose job was to make sure I didn't. So I stayed. I counted the days. I kept my mouth shut, and I slept with the brass key in the pocket of my pajamas, which sounds ridiculous, but the longer I lived in that house, the less ridiculous it felt. On the last morning, what was left of my life fit in a van. I carried down a single duffel bag, 1 box of books I had rescued from the contractor bags, and the honeymoon photograph, which I had flattened under a dictionary for 2 weeks and tucked into my coat. My daughter met me on the porch. She had an envelope in her hand, and for one strange, weightless second, I thought it might be a letter, an apology, something. The little girl who fell asleep on my shoulder during long car rides had to still be in there somewhere, and a foolish old chamber of my heart thought maybe this was the moment she would surface. It was a check, $20,000. "Here's what's going to happen," she said in the voice she used on contractors. "You cash this, you sign the diner over to us, and we're square. That building is a liability, Dad. You're 70 years old. You cannot manage a commercial property, and frankly, we'd be doing you a favor. You'll thank me." I looked at the check for a long time. I looked at her face, searching one last time for the kid in the church parking lot, wobbling off on 2 wheels, screaming with joy. I couldn't find her anywhere. What I found instead was a stranger doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic was off, because here is the thing that finally fully woke me up. Standing on that porch, $20,000 is not what you offer for a worthless building. You don't write a check for a tetanus shot and a tax bill. You don't laugh at a property in a lawyer's office and then show up 3 weeks later with cash in hand and a speech you've rehearsed. The offer didn't match the story. The numbers didn't balance. And my wife had never in 41 years done a single thing by accident. I took the check, tore it in half, then in half again, and handed her back the pieces. "I'll take my chances," I Said, her face did something complicated. And ugly. Fine, she said. Rot out there. When you're freezing in that dump in. January, do not call this number. I got in my car and drove west, and I did not look in the mirror once. 2 hours of highway giving way to mill towns, then hills, then long stretches of stone wall, and bare trees and hand-painted signs, selling eggs and firewood, somewhere in the last 20 miles, with no radio signal and nothing but my own breathing. I said it out loud to the windshield just to hear how it sounded. All right, sweetheart, show me. The diner sat back from the road on a gravel lot, smaller than I had pictured it. A long, low building with a sagging tin roof, windows boarded over. A pole sign out front faded down to ghosts of letters. Behind it, 11 acres, rolled back toward a tree and gone to brush and saplings. The kind of land you could drive past your whole life and never once see. I parked and sat there, with the engine ticking and my heart sank a little. My daughter was right about one thing. It looked worthless. The brass key fought the rusted padlock, then gave all at once. The door swung in and I stood on the threshold for a full minute because nothing inside that building matched the outside of it. The boards on the windows were fake. I want to say that again because it took my brain 3 tries to accept it. The plywood I had seen from the parking lot was mounted from the inside, hung on cleats like storm shutters, fitted and painted to look weathered from the road. Decoys. The whole building was wearing a costume behind the boards. The windows themselves were new, double-paned, clean, and the diner was spotless, not preserved, not frozen in time, maintained. The counter had been refinished. The stools had new vinyl, deep red. The floor had been mopped. Recently enough that I could smell the pine cleaner under the cold. There was new wiring stapled in neat runs along the ceiling, a breaker panel with the inspection sticker still bright on it. And in the back, where I had expected a rusted ruin, a rebuilt kitchen, the flat top scrubbed and seasoned, the hood gleaming. Coffee cups stood stacked by the register in clean white towers like the morning rush was due any minute and had been due any minute for a long time. My wife had been coming here. There was no other explanation, and there was no way to make the explanation make sense. For 2 years, while I thought she was at her sister's, at her book club, at the long doctor's appointments, she always insisted on driving herself to. My wife had been making a 2-hour drive to a building I didn't know we owned and rebuilding it from the inside behind fake boards in secret while she was dying. I walked the length of the counter with my hand on it. Halfway down, I stopped because of the smell. Under the pine cleaner and the cold, there was a third thing, faint but unmistakable to a man who slept next to it for 4 decades. Her hand cream, lavender, and something chemical sweet. She had stood exactly where I was, standing recently enough that the air still knew it. I'm not ashamed to tell you I sat down on one of her new red stools and cried for a while. The kind you only do alone in an empty building too. Hours from anyone who knows your name. When I was done, I saw it at the far end of the counter, set out neat as a place setting sat a second envelope, propped against a sugar dispenser, my name on it and her handwriting. And next to the envelope, folded with a knife crease, sat a clean white apron. I didn't understand the apron yet. I would. The letter was short. She never wasted words. My wife, sweetheart, if you're reading this, you made it. And I'm sorry for every minute between the lawyer's office and this counter because I know exactly what those minutes were like. I knew, and I let it happen anyway. And someday you'll understand why I had to. There is a hatch under the floor of the back office behind the filing cabinet. The brass key opens what you find down there. Read everything before you call anyone. Some things are safer on paper. I love you. I always have. I was never once at my sister's. I read it twice and put it in my breast pocket behind the honeymoon photograph. Then I went looking for the office. The office was a closet of a room off the kitchen, a metal desk, a dead phone, a heavy filing cabinet against the back wall. The cabinet screeched across the linoleum when I dragged it aside, and there was a square cut into the floorboards with a recessed ring pull. The seams so tight, I would have mopped over it for years and never noticed. A short ladder dropped into the dark. I climbed down with my phone for light. The crawl space was low and dry, and in the corner under a canvas tarp sat a green metal strongbox with a brass padlock. The same key opened it. She had cut one key for the whole truth. Inside were 3 folders, each labeled in her careful teacher's hand, and on top of them one more letter, thicker than the others. I sat down right there in the dirt and read by phone light, and my hand shook the whole time. I opened the first folder before the letter. I shouldn't have. She told me to read everything in order, but the tab on the first folder said a word that made order. Impossible. The tab said evidence bank. Records, withdrawal slips going back a little over 2 years, photocopied, dated, arranged in sequence. Each one carried my wife's signature, and each signature had been circled in red ink. And on the first page, on a sticky note in her handwriting, was a single sentence, the kind she used to write in the margins of a student's exam. Look at the loops. Too tight. Not my hand. She was right. Once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. My wife's capital letters opened like doors. These were pinched shut. Page after page. 800 here, 2,000 there, then bolder. 5,000, 9,000. A forged power of attorney with a notary stamp from a county we had never set foot in. And then paperclip to the back. The page that emptied my lungs. A bank security. Camera still grainy, but plain as day. My daughter at a teller window. Mid-transaction, wearing the wool coat I had bought her 2 Christmases ago. I remembered her opening that box. I remembered her hugging me in it. A second sticky note on the photo itself. Discovered 18 months ago. Watched. Let her think she got away with it. Set the trap. The running total tallied in my wife's handwriting in the same red pen she used to grade with came to a little under $300,000. Stolen from our retirement accounts. Stolen in our sleep. Stolen the dates made clear. Straight through the diagnosis. Straight through the chemotherapy. Straight through the autumn when my wife was so weak I carried her up the stairs, and my daughter sat at her bedside on Sundays, holding her hand, and then apparently drove to a bank branch on Mondays and signed her dying mother's name with the loops pinched too tight. I sat in the dirt and understood something that rearranged me while I was reading mystery novels out loud at a hospice bed. My wife was living inside one. She had spent 18 months watching her own child rob her, saying nothing, gathering paper, every casserole, every bedside visit, every time my daughter kissed her mother's forehead and said, "Rest, Mom. I've got everything handled." My wife had known precisely what was being handled and had lain there in that bed, building her case one bank statement at a time, because she understood something about evidence that I was only learning. Now in a crawl space by phone light, confrontation warns people. Documentation convicts them. The second folder was labeled trust documents. It was the boring one my wife would have said, and it was the one that turned out to be made of steel 1.5 years before she died, right around the time the sticky notes said she discovered the theft. My wife had quietly moved the diner and all 11 acres into an irrevocable trust with me as sole beneficiary. She had anticipated my confusion, too, and the folder included a page in her own handwriting titled, "What this means in English. It means the property is not part of the estate." She wrote, "It means no will contest can touch it. It means no power of attorney, no guardianship, no conservatorship, no judge or daughter can hire her way in front of can ever pull it out of your hands. They cannot take it if you get sick. They cannot take it if they convince a court you are confused and, sweetheart, understand me, they are going to try. She had underlined that. Last part twice. She had written it more. Then a year before I found the folder ad. The curb with my name typed into a residency contract. She hadn't predicted the future. She had simply known her daughter with a clarity I had spent 30 years declining to share. And then there was a clause flagged with a red tab. And the red tab said Section 9, and Section 9 was the trap. If our daughter contested the will attempted to obtain guardianship or power of attorney over me, or attempted in any way to acquire or encumber the diner property. 2. Things happened automatically. First, her entire inheritance, the lake house, the accounts, the insurance, all of it, reverted to me. Second, a complete copy of the evidence folder went to federal investigators. The attorney already held a sealed duplicate of everything in the strong box. My wife hadn't just gathered the ammunition. She had loaded it, aimed it, and tied the trigger to my daughter's own greed. The only way the gun ever went off was if my daughter pulled it herself. The third folder was the thinnest, and it was the one that made me set the phone down in the dirt because the light was shaking too much to read by. It held a state transportation department notice, a surveyor's map, and 22 years of patience. The state had approved a highway interchange project fully funded, years in the planning. The new on-ramp came off the rural route in a long curve, and the long curve cut directly across the back of our 11 acres. My wife had bought this property 2 decades ago because she sat in the back of public transportation board meetings, reading minutes nobody else on earth bothered to read, saw where the lines on a 40-year plan were headed, and spent $96,000 on a dead diner, and waited the state's preliminary appraisal for the easement, and the remaining commercial frontage was paper-clipped to the map. I read the number 4 times, and the arithmetic said that the worthless parking lot with the Titani's shot was worth almost exactly 4 times the lake house. She knew that was the part one had to keep saying out loud in the crawl space. 2. Nobody like a man learning a new word. 11 months before she died, my wife sat in a lawyer's office, sick as she was, and split our life's holdings into 2 piles. One pile was big and shiny, invisible, and she gave it to the child who had been forging her signature. One pile was small and ugly and boarded over with fake plywood, and she gave it to me. She had weighed her own daughter to the ounce. The will wasn't a will. It was a verdict written in assets, and my daughter had laughed out loud at her own sentencing. Then I read her last letter, the thick one, and I'm going to share the parts of it I can. My love, if you are reading this in the crawl space, then everything held, and I got the one thing I prayed for at the end, which was time. There are things in these folders I should have told you to your face, and I want you to know why I didn't. It was not because I doubted you. It was because you are honest, and honest men have honest faces, and our daughter has spent her whole life reading faces and finding the soft places in them. If you had known, she would have seen it on you. At the first Sunday dinner, I needed her. Confident people sign things. Confident people keep using the same pen. I found the first forged slip 18 months ago on an ordinary Tuesday, and I sat in the bank parking lot for an hour, deciding whether to scream or to build. You know what I chose? I read the board. Minutes nobody reads. I keep the receipts nobody keeps. I know this hurts worse than the cancer ever hurt me. I know that somewhere in your good heart, you are still looking for the girl in the church parking lot. I looked for her for years, sweetheart, and I will tell you what I finally accepted. Lying in that bed, listening to her downstairs, measuring our windows while I was still alive. Some people are born wanting more than love can fill. That is not your failure. It was never your failure. It is a choice she made with her own 2 Hands over and over every Monday at that. Tell her window, and you are allowed to. Stop bleeding for it. Here is what I need from you now. Do not call her. Do not warn her. Grief makes men want to fix things, and there is nothing here to fix. The attorney has copies of everything and instructions for every move they can make. You will not be alone out there. I have seen to that, too. And you will know what I mean by tomorrow evening. The diner is yours. The land is yours. What you do with the evidence is yours. I had 18 months to decide what our daughter deserves, and I could not do it. So I am leaving the verdict where it belongs, with the man whose name she was going to sign next. Trust the diner. Wear the apron. You will understand the apron. I love you more than I ever managed to say out loud, which the two of us both know was already a ridiculous amount. I climbed out of the crawl space with dirt on my good funeral suit, stood at the counter in the last gray light coming through her clean new windows, and said it out loud, because some sentences have to be spoken to become true. She is not my daughter anymore. And then, because I am the man my wife married, I got a rag and wiped the dust off the counter where I had been sitting, and I started a pot of coffee in her rebuilt kitchen, and I got to work reading every page in that strong box a second time in order, the way she had told me to in the first place. The next evening, an old pickup crunched into the gravel lot, and I understood what my wife had meant about not being alone. The man who climbed out was 70 if he was a day, flannel and work boots, a thermos in one hand and a paper sack in the other, and he walked up to the door like he had done it 1,000 times. As it turned out, he had. You'd be her husband, he said. It wasn't a question. He ran the feed store down the road, and for 2 years, my wife had paid him to look after the place, mow the lot, keep the pipes from freezing, run off anybody who came around taking pictures. He set the thermos in the sack on the counter, then reached into his coat and handed me an envelope, fat and banded. She paid me 2 years back, he said. I said, if you ever showed up here alone, I was to feed you and give you this. Said you'd be too proud to ask anybody for money, so I wasn't to give you the option. $15,000 in hundreds, a turkey sandwich, coffee that was exactly the strength, I take it. I started to thank him, and he waved it off like a horsefly. Don't thank me, thank her. That woman thought of everything. Then he glanced at the back office door at the filing cabinet I hadn't pushed all the way back, and his face told me he knew exactly what was under that floor and had spent 2 years not knowing it out loud. Then he told me the thing he had really driven out to tell me. Your daughter's been in town. He said her and a fellow in a gray suit drives a silver SUV. They've been at the county clerk's office asking about right-of-way filings. They've been at the assessor's. Yesterday, they were at the feed store asking me, friendly as you please, whether the old man at the diner seemed, and he held up 2 fingers on each hand to make the quotes confused. There, circling sun, he said. They'll come out here maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. Don't sign one single thing. Your lawyer's already been called. I had her number taped inside my register for 2 years. He stood, buttoned his coat, and at the door he stopped. One more thing she told me to say if it ever got to this. He recited it carefully, like a man setting down a parcel he had carried a long way. When they come, let them talk. They convict themselves. They always think the quiet ones are the stupid ones. His taillights bounced away down the dark road, and I thought about the man in the gray suit. The attorney, when I had called her that morning, had said only this. Read the emails in the bottom of the box again. He found your daughter before your daughter found him. I had read them. A developer out of the city who had gotten the state's preliminary appraisal through a friend at the county, and who had been writing to my daughter for 5 months. The plan was laid out across those printouts in plain corporate English, polite as a Dinner invitation. Move the old man into a facility. Obtain conservatorship. Transfer the parcel. Split the difference. My daughter's replies were shorter than his, and the shortest one was the one I had to put down and walk away from twice before I could finish. It said, he'll sign. He's been lost since Mom got sick. Honestly, the home is a mercy. A mercy. My daughter had found a way to call it a mercy. The phone rang 2 nights later, and her name lit up the screen. I answered, said, hello, muted my end, set the phone on the counter, and let her assume the silence on the line was an old man fumbling with a touchscreen. Then I pressed record. She wasn't even careful. Once she decided I wasn't really on the line, the business voice came out, and somebody was in the room with her. I heard it all, tiny and clear. The easement, the whole back parcel. We get him to sign the purchase agreement before he figures out what's under that land. Then the conservatorship filing goes in. The facility takes him Tuesday, and the property moves before the state's offer is public. 40 years of teaching taught me one thing. People tell you exactly who they are the moment they think the grading has stopped. I saved the recording and backed it up twice. Then I called the attorney at 9 o'clock at night, and she picked up on the second ring like she had been waiting for a week. And when I told her what I had, she said the only thing my wife's attorney ever needed to say, good, now we wait for them to drive out to you. Say as little as possible. Let them talk. And when the silver SUV pulls into your lot, call me before they're out of the car. I can be there in 40 minutes, and I will not be coming alone. They came 2 days later. I heard the tires on the gravel before I saw them, a black sedan, and behind it the silver SUV. And I made the call from the kitchen before either engine shut off, exactly as instructed. Then I stepped out onto the porch in my wife's clean white apron, which I had taken to wearing in the mornings, and which turned out to be the single best costume a man in my position could have chosen. I looked exactly like what they needed me to be, a confused old man playing restaurant. My daughter got out of the sedan in sunglasses and a coat that cost more than the diner's tax bill. The man who climbed out of the SUV moved slow and sure, gray hair, combed straight back, the kind of man accustomed to people waiting on his sentences. The developer, Dad, my daughter called, finding a smile somewhere. The apron's cute. We need to talk. The developer came forward with his hand out and a little speech about taking a burden off my hands. The building was a money pit, he explained. Taxes, liability, an old roof, an old month. He didn't say that last part, but every sentence leaned on it. He opened a leather folio on the hood of the SUV. A purchase agreement flagged with little arrow stickers everywhere. My signature went. 1.1 million, he said, cash today, for a property the county values at 96,000. I'm overpaying, frankly, but your daughter tells me you've had a hard year, and I'd like this to be easy for you. And there it was again, the arithmetic that didn't balance, except this time I knew the missing variable, and it was sitting in a strong box 40 feet behind me. I looked at my daughter. You brought him here. I said, Dad, it's an incredible offer. She said, it's 11 times what that dump is worth. Take it. Get a nice condo near us and enjoy whatever. She caught herself and enjoy your retirement near us. The facility was 2 hours from anyone I knew in the opposite direction. Even now, she couldn't keep her own story straight. I set my coffee down on the porch rail. I took out my phone and I pressed play. Her own voice came out of the little speaker, tiny and bright in the cold morning air. Every word of it, the easement, the whole back parcel sign. Before he figures out what's under that land, the conservatorship filing, the facility takes him Tuesday. I watched the blood leave my daughter's face in real time, and I watched the developer's warm smile drop off his mouth like ice off a roof. That was 4 nights ago. I said, you assumed I couldn't work the phone. Everyone in this family keeps assuming the quiet ones are the stupid ones. The developer recovered first. His kind never stays staggered long. Sir, I don't know what you think you heard, he began. And that was exactly when the third vehicle came up the gravel. A white SUV with state plates behind it. And out of the white SUV stepped my wife's attorney with her leather briefcase. And out of the state car stepped a young man in a transportation department windbreaker holding a clipboard. The attorney walked straight past the developer as if he were lot furniture, said good morning to me pleasantly, and then turned and dismantled 2 people in under 3 minutes. To the developer, she handed a page. Cease and desist. You are prohibited from contacting my client or making offers on this property. The irrevocable trust names you, sir, specifically in its exclusion provisions, which should concern you a great deal because it means she was documenting your correspondence months before she passed to my daughter a second set of pages, notice of trust, violation review, your presence here today facilitating an acquisition. Attempt is itself a triggering event. Under Section 9, the forfeit clause is active. The lake house, the accounts, the insurance proceeds, all of it now reverts to your father pending review. And separately, she let the pause get heavier. A complete evidentiary file concerning approximately $294,000 in forged withdrawals has been prepared for federal referral. Whether it is sent is no longer my decision. It is his. Then the young man in the windbreaker stepped up and addressed the only person on that lot the state recognized. Sir, your late wife filed right-of-way correspondence with our office 18 months ago. The interchange project is fully funded. You'll receive our formal acquisition offer on the rear easement within 60 days. He glanced sideways at the developer. I should mention your inquiries about this parcel have been noted and denied. The state deals with the owner of record. That is this gentleman and this gentleman alone. The developer did not say goodbye. He closed his folio, got into the silver SUV, and his tires threw gravel the whole way out to the road. I never saw him again, which left my daughter standing alone in the middle of the lot holding pages that were trembling slightly, though there was no wind. She tried twice more. For the record, people like that never go quietly. The first try came by email through her lawyer to mine. She would challenge the will on grounds of my incompetence. She had witnesses, she claimed, to my confusion and my wandering. An elderly man living alone in a derelict commercial building with no running water, the letter said, which was its own small comedy, since the water in my wife's rebuilt kitchen ran hot in 11 seconds, the attorney replied with one paragraph reminding her counsel that any competency filing was a Section 9 triggering event, that the forfeit review was already underway because of the parking lot, and that the federal referral file was prepared, addressed, and one signature from the mail. Her lawyer withdrew the threat. Within a day, I am told he also stopped representing her shortly after, which lawyers only do when a client has lied to them about something large. The second try came by phone on a Sunday night from a number I didn't recognize. Because I had blocked hers, I answered. Standing at the diner counter, there was a long silence, and then my daughter's voice, and it had located somewhere the sound it used to make when she was 8, and feverish, and wanted to be carried. Daddy, she said, this is all a misunderstanding. He manipulated me. The developer, the grief. You don't understand what it was like watching Mom. I let her finish. My wife had taught me that at the end of everything, let them talk. I watched your mother die. From 18 and away, I said, you watched from a bank teller's window. And then I told her the terms because by then the forfeit review had concluded and everything was mine. All of it. The lake house, the accounts, the insurance, the diner, the land, the whole estate, gathered back into the hands of the person it had been stolen from, and the only and signed thing left in the world was the federal referral. So these are the terms. I said, you will vacate the lake house, which you do not own and never legally did, within 30 days. Here that's a customary amount of time. You will return every dollar you can. Return, and you will never contact me again. Not at Christmas, not at my funeral, because the day you do, the file goes out, and we both know what is in the file because your mother built it while you held her hand on Sundays. The silence on the line went on so long, I checked the screen to see if she had hung up. Then her voice came back, and the 8-year-old was gone out of it, and what was left was flat and cold, and for the first time in a year, completely honest. You're really choosing A. Building over your own daughter, she said, and standing there in my wife's apron, in my wife's diner, 2 hours and a whole life away from the guest room, I finally said the sentence she had left. Meet 18 months to find. No, I said. Your mother already made that choice. For both of us, she just had the decency to wait until she'd seen everything before she graded it. I hung up and set the phone face down on the counter, and in the quiet in that spotless diner that was worth 4 Lakias and 1 entire marriage, I swear the smell of lavender hand cream came up out of nothing the way it does some nights. And I stood at her counter, 70 years old, evicted, widowed, disowned by my own blood, and richer in every direction than I had ever been. And I said out loud to nobody, to her, all right, sweetheart. I read it all, every page. You can rest now. The phone buzzed once more against the counter. Her last message ever. 3 words. You'll regret this. I picked it up, looked at it for a long moment, and forwarded the file